Safe to say it's been a big couple of years, a lot of change, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of eyeballs on you, and you've just come out of your first AGM. I guess the simple question is, how are you feeling about it all?
I'm feeling very motivated and very excited by it. It's chairing any company is a privilege, but one that's a fairly iconic sort of part of the nation is doubly exciting. And I think it does occupy two roles. It's a business, of course. It's a public company, and with all the challenges that airlines have, but it's also part of our national identity. It's a Flying Kangaroo, and sort of whether you're a shareholder or not, you see Qantas as part of the reputation of Australia around the world. So we have a huge imperative to make sure that we don't run it just as a business, but we also fulfil those ambitions in society, I think.
The way that events have played out in the last couple of years have been seismic to Qantas's reputation. I think that's a fair estimation. Yeah. And there's a big job that I think you've inherited to restore that trust. What are your immediate priorities from a governance perspective as the chair?
I think getting a balance between acknowledging the past, dealing with the past, being transparent, but at the same time not dwelling in the past. We have to move forward. A lot of things happened, some sort of unexpected and not actually the airline's fault. I mean, COVID, there are not many companies that went literally overnight from full revenue to zero revenue. And Qantas could very easily have gone bankrupt, as Virgin and others did. It never received any additional government support beyond which was available to businesses generally. So it was an extremely difficult time, and they took a lot of decisions on the run, which they had to. And in retrospect, some of them probably weren't the best idea, but that's quite easy looking back later on when you're not there in the heat of the moment. So, I'm very satisfied that no one deliberately did anything wrong. To the contrary, they were trying very hard. But some errors were made. And then, of course, when the airline restarted, it was sort of compounded because we didn't know when it was going to restart. And when it did, trying to get people back, you've got 20,000 people furloughed or whatever, and suddenly you've got to go and try and get them back. And a lot of them didn't come back, and stop-start with government, etc. It was a very difficult time. I'm not in any way trying to excuse some of the errors that were made, but I think people do need to realise just how tough it was. And the good thing about Qantas is even it's his harshest critic, and there are a few. I've had lots of helpful suggestions as to what we should be doing, as you can imagine, but even the harshest critic wants to see the company succeed. It's got a lot of goodwill. So that's a great place to start from. We're not trying to sell asbestos or cigarettes or something in today's world. So I think it doesn't need a lot, but it needs consistent and deep focus on reputation, and it's sort of inextricably linked with things like on-time performance and value for money and those other contributing factors.
And I think that customer question is really key to the path forward and what the expectations are now. From a board vantage point, what are you looking for from management or from a metrics perspective in terms of taking that customer experience to a better place?
So if I could start with not directly a customer experience, but critical is safety. So I've been involved in industrial type businesses all my life, and sadly any company can have a fatal accident with a forklift or something, but there are not many industries that can kill 300 people at a go. So certainly the greatest due diligence I did as far as you can on these things before joining the board was to say, with all of this going on, has Qantas in any way lost its safety culture? And I was very satisfied that wasn't the case. And what was really interesting is some of the findings that Tom Saar highlighted around culture, etc., and the lack of sort of command and control and lack of ability to speak up, etc., is the absolute opposite in the safety area. So, even the cleaner can ground an aircraft if they say something that they think looks unsafe or whatever. And even if it turns out to be a false alarm, there's no penalty. You're encouraged to do that. So it was really extraordinary to me. You had this complete opposites in the same organization. If that safety culture had flowed through to management, it would be a different place. But it was very focused on keeping people safe. That's all people thought about, were charged with, which, thank heavens, I mean, who would want to fly on an airline that doesn't have that culture? And I think Qantas's reputation for safety around the world is, right at the top, and it's with good cause. I think they've earned it.
You've been in positions before where you needed to, or you've had support to turn around a company. What experiences or professional experiences as a chair you're bringing into this role for this unique challenge?
That's a good question. I think as the challenges for boards change with societal expectations, and they are. I mean, you go back 20 or 30 years, it was just shareholder return, that's it. Nobody thought about anything else. There was no ESG, there was no, even social license really wasn't sort of discussed very much. That's changed dramatically, of course, and I think boards need to change with that, which is why certainly in my little section of the corporate world where I work, I've tried very hard to really diversify boards. And I think we still talk about gender mainly in Australia when we talk about diversity, but the danger with that is you end up with the guys and girls looking exactly the same. They all come from the same background. So that isn't actually diversity. I think diversity is people who come from a very different world, maybe not a business world at all. Perhaps they've come from a not-for-profit, or they've come from other areas where they're acutely aware of the pressures on society of some of these decisions. Whether it's a good return on capital or not, that's secondary. It's actually going to have a devastating impact on your employees or your customers or the society, the area that you operate in. So those things, it's hard for people trained in the old way of just being focused on capital returns and things to open their mind enough to that. So you need real diversity around the board table where those people go straight to that. And it makes them, I'm getting old and I'm sort of more classically background there. And it's really good to hear someone say that. I think that's really clever. That's absolutely the issue we should be thinking about. I've just been looking at it as we're going to get a return on the capital, but actually that's more important.
How do you think those skills matrices have evolved over time? You've been a director for some time now. What's shifting in that space of what constitutes a healthy or well-composed board? Obviously acknowledging that it would be different for different sectors.
It is obviously different. I think like many of these things, we sometimes get caught in process as much as outcome. And by that I mean, we have all these boxes to tick, and you do the board capability review and it ends up with everybody ticking everything. We're all geniuses. And okay, we've ticked all the boxes, but have we actually achieved diversity or whatever around the board? I have a sort of simplistic, but it's served me well, view where I would divide directors into three buckets. The first is you absolutely need 2 or 3 who understand the industry right down to the minutiae. So who can discuss with management any level of detail and be across it. Because none of us can be across every industry. So you need some people who can do that. You don't want everybody in that category, otherwise you end up all the same as management. So you need 2 or 3 there and who can challenge, and particularly as you get into technical areas. When I was at Telstra, for example, once people started shifting from Cisco boxes to software-defined networking and all these things, and your eyes glaze over. So you've got to have 2 or 3 directors who really know that well, and the same in airlines. Then you need 2 or 3 directors who just bring the strongest level of governance out there. So I know I can sleep easily in my bed as chair because I've got someone who's read every single page of every report, every annex, every footnote, and they've cross-referenced back to the last 3 board meetings, and you feel in good hands that somebody is doing that. It used to be just around audit, but now REM is probably just as important. You slip up in REM is hugely damaging, and risk generally across the reputational risk and all those other things. And then the third bucket is the one that gives me fun, which is diversity in the real sense of the word. So we need 2 or 3 directors who come from totally different backgrounds to the rest of us, who different values, probably different nationalities, geographies, different experiences in life, and who challenge the traditional way of thinking around a board. And you see so often people sort of always try to end up back sort of, you're comfortable when everybody looks like you do sort of thing, you know. You need to fight that the whole time. Make sure you bring in just totally different perspectives. And that also goes up and down depending on the industry and more rest of it. But that's served me pretty well over the years.
And thinking about you, let's focus on John for a second. You do have a diverse portfolio of chairmanships. How is the workload? How do you manage the different perspectives and balance those obligations?
Yeah. Well, first I have to say, look, Qantas came along out of the blue. It's such an honour to be asked, a privilege to be asked. I wasn't going to turn it down. I wasn't looking for another board seat at that time. I was quite comfortable doing what I was doing. So I've sort of inherited it. I mean, that said, I'm extremely conscious of trying to do a good job. And I think I'm able to balance what I have, even though I know I have to reduce because ultimately the box tickers and proxy advisors and others will get themselves into a knot if I don't, and I will. But you can't just walk out on a company just suddenly, I just better offer. Sorry, guys, I'm off. You know, that would be absolutely appalling. So, and particularly if you don't have a succession plan in place, and in any company, there's always stuff going on behind the scenes, a CEO transition maybe, or something else that it's not public isn't aware of. You can't leave in the middle of that. But that said, you know, I've had some robust debates with one or two of the external observers, and I said, right, have you ever been director of a large ASX company? Oh, no, I haven't. Okay. Have you asked any of my boards? Have you asked any of the other directors whether I'm doing a good job or not? Oh, no, I haven't. Right. And have I missed any board meetings? Oh, no, you haven't. Are there any decisions that I was absent on? No. Okay. So with greatest respect, you're judging whether I'm doing a good job or not based on you've got 5 points for the number of boards you want to tick this box. I think that's pretty unfair. You know, if somebody talked to all my boards and said, John's never there, we can't get him on the phone, then fair enough, I'd cop the criticism. But I mean, I love it, I enjoy it. I don't do it for any reason other than I thoroughly enjoy business and I feel committed. I don't know if that answers your question.
What is the journey you've been on in terms of your cybersecurity education as a director, and where are you at now?
Well, I'm not sure it's a positive thing about me, but I've probably had more experience of the good and the bad, and particularly the bad, than many directors, and I wish for their sake it stays that way. You know, I've seen some of the very best in the industry with Telstra and Qantas is at a very high level as well, and you know, I'm sure the banks are as well. You know, there's where it doesn't mean you can't get caught out. Absolutely, you can. Everybody is vulnerable. Federal government's vulnerable, but it's cyber protection at the highest level. Sort of all the way through. In the middle, I was chairman of Toll when we had 2 cyber attacks, ransomware attacks. And sort of coming back to your point, we decided early on we wouldn't pay the ransom. And I think that was the right decision. And even though it cost the company a huge amount of money, we never knew what the ransom would have been because we refused to engage. But I think as a large corporate, you have an obligation not to pay ransoms, basically, because otherwise it just fuels the industry. The reference that you made there was I also have a small private foundation, a little museum and a history thing, which I love. And we had a ransomware attack there. It was a random one because nobody knows who I am or a little thing like that, but it wasn't targeted. And they got in through an API into and I immediately said, no way I'm going to pay the ransom. And then sort of looking back on it, because it was only a little tiny business, quite likely the ransom would have been $5,000 or something, you know. And I think, you know, I lost 30 years worth of collection data it's taken 3 years to rebuild. We still don't have everything. So I mean, that was a little bit of a sort of luxury on the side. But if you were a small business and you got your house on the line, and if you don't get this thing fixed pretty quickly, you're going to lose your house and take the kids out of school. I think you could be forgiven for paying, being tempted to pay a ransom, as awful as it is. So that was the only point I was trying to make, that I don't think we should have a blanket rule. I think you need to understand people's individual situations.
What are you hoping to see as a result of policy reform in Australia going forward, given we're on the eve of an election? But I guess more specifically, do you think there needs to be a recalibration of that regulatory saying?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. The trouble with all regulatory regimes is you never get rid of the old one, you just add another one. And that's sort of human nature, I understand that. And there's always a good reason why these things are brought in. People don't sit in Canberra saying, how can I screw up the private sector? I mean, they do it for a reason, because someone's done something wrong, or there's been some clear gap or exposure to the public or something. So it's always well-meaning, usually anyway. But I don't think we then circle back every few years and review. We've now got 10 regulators in that sector where we only used to have 2. Is that actually making life more complicated? Something I know at Telstra, there were so many regulators, we had to have a list of things, because I couldn't remember them all as a board member, and I was there for years, and every day there's another one, sort of thing. So, I think that's much easier. It sounds like you're sort of whinging. I'm not whinging. You need regulation. I have no issue with that. But I do think, like tax reform, you've got taxes. It's been like that for years. Well, every now and again you need to reset and have a proper in-depth. And there'll be howls of outrage from this sector or that sector who feels impacted by it. But people could take their sort of individual hats off and put the total country's hat on around some of these reforms. I think we really need that. And probably number one on my list at the moment will be productivity. And the trouble with productivity is it's business people understand it and want to understand it, but a lot of people in society say it's just a euphemism for rich bosses screwing the workforce and keeping wages down while they all benefit from $1 million salaries. Whereas, actually, if you look back, the highest levels of wage increases in Australia's history all correspond to periods of high productivity growth. We haven't had any productivity growth for a decade now. And unfortunately, I think the forces are moving apart rather than together to address that. And, I'm a lot older than all of you guys, but I'm old enough to remember the first hand. It was part of it, the Accord with Hawke and Keating, and the ACTU, business and government came together all together, and it's an overworked cliche, but the focus was to grow the pie before arguing about how to divide it. And I say it is a cliche, but it was really true. That was the approach. And both government, particularly Labor government, to be fair, more probably than coalition at the time, but Labor government, business and the unions really sat down constructively, said, how do we make Australia a better place for everybody? Whereas today, the productivity doesn't even get mentioned in wage claims. It's forgotten. And you sort of feel that business just sort of screw down costs to make more profits. Unions want to push huge wage increase, like 20-30% type increases with no productivity. And governments just sort of sit there, and both sides of politics criticize business now. So that means business is too scared to speak up quite often and actually take a position on things. And it's a long-winded answer to your question, but if somehow this next wave of elections could lead to whatever party is in power, a genuine attempt to take our individual hats off and put a collective hat on and say, how can we address some of these things? Regulation, tax reform, productivity. And those years were dramatic. Also, you had regulation of the financial sector and all sorts of other big decisions that were made at the time that have added incalculable wealth to Australia. And I just think we need to try and do that again somehow.
It feels like it's been a long time since that wholesale reform, and I do wonder, productivity, those big upswings also driven by technological change, whether platform shifts like generative AI or whatever might be helpful?
I would hope so. I mean, capital investment is, private sector capital investment is almost at recession levels across Australia. Foreign direct investment has been falling for years. And again, people say, oh, it's just foreigners investing in our country. But those investments create jobs, they create industries, they create tax revenues. So it's not a bad thing, it's actually a really good thing. And you're also heading into a whole new demographic world. There are more and more oldies like me who are going to sort of end up on the public purse rather than the youngsters who are paying the tax. I mean, that is quite a seismic shift. You've got government share of spending increasing. You've got, I remember all the numbers, but I think the non-market economy, in other words, all things we need, like healthcare and all the other things, was sort of 10 years ago was like 21% of the economy. Now it's like 28%. And that none of that is generating income that gets taxed. You're using the tax dollars you've already collected off the private sector to pay for all that. And obviously we need hospitals, we need education, we need police force, we need all those things. But if that side of the economy is growing faster than the revenue generating side of the economy, you're on borrowed time. And what happens? The governments borrow to finance it. But eventually that runs out too. So again, I think that's why this whole idea of more significant deep-seated reform, if you could ever bring everyone together, is the way to go. But I'm not naive. If you've got minority governments or governments that depend on the support of a few independents, the chances of doing anything major like that is pretty low.
What is your most valued career lesson?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that one. I've been sort of actually consistent over the years. So I learnt very early on in my career that the only thing that really matters is cash. And you don't get rich on a P&L, you get rich on cash in the bank. And I remember as a young manager, I was riding high. We had this fantastic year. It was a tiny business at the time. And I was really pleased with myself. And then towards the end of the year, one of the big customers went bankrupt. So the money that we thought we had, we didn't get. And all of a sudden, my year went from being a really good year to a terrible year. I was a pariah of the company. And I'd never really thought about solvency. And I was in the early 20s and I don't know. Great, they said they'd pay this and here's the letter confirming it, but they didn't. So I learned that very early on that, back it up. If you've got cash in the bank, you can survive the ups and downs. If it's all on balance sheet on paper, good luck.
I mean, the flip side of that is, what is a risk that you've taken that you are proud of or that paid off in an unexpected way?
Probably not so much a single risk that paid off, but I'd like to say that I planned my career. All the scientific sort of I think was it Neil Armstrong knew he wanted to be an astronaut at age 7 or something. I can't really claim that at all. Things just sort of happened, and opportunities came up, and I think everyone gets a reasonable dose of opportunity in their life. But sometimes you don't recognise it, and sometimes you do, but you don't want to take the risk. And I got the opportunity to go as a young person, go and work in the Sahara Desert in Algeria. Everyone thought you're absolutely mad, and pipelines. But I thought, yeah, I'm going to do that. It's absolutely fantastic. What's the downside? Incredible. So off I went, and I did it. And that in turn then led to a career in the logistics industry, which I hadn't actually thought of at all. I actually worked in hotel management as it's completely unrelated, but that opened the door to logistics. That led to all my years in TNT and DHL, and it's sort of those forks in the road where you go left, you go right. At the time, they don't seem important, but when you look back, you think, wow, what happens if I'd gone the other way?
My next question was going to be, what is your favorite pastime to enrich you? But I guess adventuring to the Sahara is one of the candidates, but I mean more contemporaneously.
I've always liked adventure. I have a deep passion for history, maritime history. So I have a small private museum, and my little foundation, we go on shipwreck hunting expeditions every year out in the Coral Sea and other places. I've been to most of the remote reefs off Torres Strait and all those places, looking for old wrecks over the years, and that's therapeutic. We found quite a lot. We found Philip, I don't know if you know the name, but Philip Parker King's ship, the Mermaid, one of the early pioneers of. We found the Matthew Flinders' ship, the Cato, found the Royal Charlotte, and all of those are in areas of the early sort of colonial periods. But we also went to put together two things. We found Australia's first submarine, AE-1, and that's about 5 years ago. We were part of that, and then last 2023, the biggest one we ever done, we found the Montevideo Marrow. I don't know if you remember in the news, that was us that found that in the South China Sea. Worst ever loss of life in Australia's history in any one event. Over 1,000 young Aussies died. And found that at 4.5 meters, 1,000 meters deep in the Titanic. I enjoy doing that. I've skied to the North Pole. I've climbed mountains and all those. I enjoy trying to do that, especially get in a. Well, if you sit in front of a bloody laptop all day long, it's really helpful to clear the mind, to get into a situation where you either say, can't think about the mortgage or anything else, I've just got to stay alive, I'm going to kill myself if I don't. Or you're so engrossed in something and there are no communications, and even bushwalking. I enjoy bushwalking, not just for the exercise, but because I vacillate between grossly unfit and super obsessed, and then the other way. I've been doing that ever since school. Just to go and sit in the bush from home in Australia, close to the capital city, you can just sit in the bush for an hour and don't make a sound, and the whole bush comes alive. I like butterflies. I'm passionate about butterflies all my life, and but just sitting there listening to the sounds of the bush that comes alive, those things are therapeutic.
Favorite productivity hack?
No, I know the answer to that one straight away. It's to have an extraordinarily capable and dedicated executive assistant. I have been so lucky over the years. Half of them are family friends to this day. When I was living overseas, and I'm still in touch with all of them pretty well, and they make your life manageable. If it was left to me, it would be chaos. I still miss things, but they're on top of it unequivocally. That's the key to me. Yeah.
Great, honest answer. Best book or play or audio or podcast or whatever cultural thing that's really struck a chord with you?
And again, probably back to my particular area of interest. So on a weekend, I can go into my little museum. I can get out a book that was written in the 1700s by early explorers. I could put on a cappuccino and sit there in a pair of shorts and just read the accounts of how people lived their lives all those years ago. And I'm fascinated by today, if you send an email and somebody doesn't reply the same day, you say, oh, they're asleep, But in those days, you sent your whatever it was you were producing, or a letter to London. It took 6 months to get there if it didn't sink on the way, and then your agent sort of followed up. It came back another 6 months, and you didn't get paid for a year, but you still had to feed the kids and pay the rent, and how they managed business in those days. I'm interested in the history. I'm also interested in the parallels with how we live today.